Hey, what's going on? How's it going, Celia?
Going good.
Right on. Let's talk some Robert Frost here, huh? You have a poem picked out for us tonight, huh?
It's called Prayer in Spring.
You want to give it a read?
Sure. Oh, give us pleasure in the flowers today, and give us not to think so far away, as the uncertain harvest keep us here, all simply in the spring of the year. Oh, give us pleasure in the orchard white, like nothing else by day, like ghosts by night, and make us happy in the happy bees, the swarm dilating round the perfect trees. And make us happy in the darting bird, that suddenly above the bees is heard, the meteor that thrusts in with needle bill, and off a blossom in midair stands still. For this is love, and nothing else is love, the which is reserved for God above, to sanctify to what far end he will, but which it only needs that we fulfill.
Good work. Wow, great poem too. I love this choice of poem from Robert Frost. And how'd that poem make you feel reading it?
Well, it made me think a lot.
Yeah, so it's a dense poem, huh? What do you think about that title, A Prayer in Spring? What do you make of that?
Well, I'm wondering, when I see a prayer, I'm thinking maybe a church or a synagogue or a place of prayer. And then I look at the poem and no, it's not. It's outside. But then I look at the other part of the title in spring, and then I realize, oh, it's going to be outside because it's spring.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what Robert Frost felt. We can read about his biography and about his life and know that he truly loved nature, which any fan of his poetry would know how much he loved nature. And it's hard to know exactly what he thought about God. Maybe he believed in God and maybe he didn't. But he was certainly writing for an audience of the time where we could expect them to have a kind of, an interest in poetry about these types of topics. What do you think about, the poem opens and gives us this idea of spring, but these first four lines there, which we call a quatrain. The poem is organized into these sections of four lines. Each section is called a stanza, and when we have four lines in a row in a stanza, we call them quatrains. In the first quatrain, then we have the uncertain harvest. What do you make of the fact that Frost brings up uncertain harvest when he's talking about this beautiful time of year?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think he's trying to keep it mysterious. It's one of the questions of the poem.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it is kind of weird, right? So like if we were going out together and looking at some beautiful time of spring, we might have less complicated feelings than this speaker. And this speaker is thinking about a time far away after the summer and the fall, what's going to happen to their crops. And why do you think the speaker might be thinking so far away about a time not 2 seasons away, about what happens in the fall?
Well, I'm just connecting this back to the first stanza.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we're still at that.
We're still in this first stanza.
Yeah.
The line before the line with the uncertain harvest, give us not to think so far away.
Right.
So he's thinking far away about the uncertain harvest.
Why do you think the speaker is thinking about the uncertain harvest?
I'm not sure about that, though.
Do you think that the speaker could be a farmer, someone who lives according to the land, and the harvest they're totally dependent on their livelihood and of their survival from the land?
Probably.
So a lot of times in Robert Frost's life, he chose deliberately to live as a subsistence farmer. So his family and his children were completely dependent on their ability to produce stuff off the earth. Even when they lived abroad in England, Robert Frost decided that they would grow their own stuff. And this gave him the freedom not to be dependent on other people for income and not be dependent on other people to tell him what to do. So he felt that the earth was his source of freedom and the freedom for his family as well. But because of that, he was dependent on every harvest and for many parts of his life. and he had a deep sympathy for people who are farmers. Let's go on to that second stanza. So that's he introduces these happy bees. What do you make of those bees and the ghosts?
Well, the ghosts, I'm thinking he's still talking about the orchard white, first line of that stanza.
Great.
White, like ghosts, like if you've ever been a ghost for Halloween, I mean, those of you who might be children watching, I mean, you cut holes in a white sheet, and that's a ghost. And in the name Orchard White, it's white, like a ghost.
So he's kind of continuing on that metaphor, the image of the white, and then continuing that into the next line, and elevating that into this kind of fantasy of ghosts, right? Okay. Even though at night you wouldn't see that they're white, I guess, unless you were actually really confronted with real ghosts. Okay. So that's weird. That is weird. This poem does have this weird kind of thing, just to the uncertainty in the first stanza, then is echoed in this kind of otherworldly ghosts in the second stanza. But then we have these bees. What do you make of the bees?
The bees, I'm not sure. I mean, give us pleasure in the happy bees. Well, he's asking to be happy just like the bees.
Right, so it's just kind of a balancing that the speaker does between potential catastrophe and between satisfaction and joy and pleasure, right? So the speaker is constantly kind of considering really bad things that could happen because he wants to see ghosts, right? And amazing, positive, fulfilling things, and kind of constantly they're hanging in the balance, perfectly balanced by these four lines apiece. Now let's go back to now let's return to this third stanza. What do you think is happening there with the bird, the meteor that thrusts in? What's going on with this meteor?
So when I was looking at this poem, I was really confused about the meteor too. And I thought about it for a bit, and meteors, well, basically the definition of a meteor, it's like a comet, except you see a comet, like, you've got a chance to see it. Mm-hmm. Like, a comet, like Halley's Comet, it comes, like, every century or so.
Right, okay, great, yep.
But a meteor, you only see once. It's there, and it's gone.
So why do you think Frost is comparing the bird's head and its beak that's sticking in to a meteor?
That's probably like you see it and then you never see that it flies away and notices you, and you probably never see that bird again in your life.
Right. So we poets we have a term for this called ars longa vita brevis, which is poetry lasts a long time, but art is fleeting and life is fleeting and brief. So in other words, this bird, its existence in spring, and the poet is thinking about his own existence. The speaker is thinking about his existence is short. It's a very brief time we have on Earth, and then it's gone like the meteor. But there's so much pleasure that the bird is deriving from this action, the way that this sounds, that suddenly above the bees is heard, the meteor that thrusts in with needle bill. The language is very sing-songy and beautiful. So despite the fact that the speaker's keenly aware that life is going to be over really quickly, nevertheless, there's a real joy taken from it, which is accentuated then that final line, and off a blossom in midair stands still, so that blossom kind of punctuates that sensation. I struggle a lot with this final stanza. So maybe the insight, your insight could help me understand this final stanza here. This is very difficult for me.
Well, there are a lot of ways to see this, but I'm seeing it as God in this stanza. He's trying to give us a chance to love like he can.
Cool. That's a really cool reading. I love it. Keep going. Keep talking to me.
So, for this is love and nothing else is love. That's talking about God made nature. God is love.
Okay. Cool.
Which is reserved for God above. Only God can actually, only God can really fully, completely love. And then to sanctify to what far ends he will. I'm not quite sure what that stanza means.
Yeah. That line, yeah, it's tough.
It's hard.
Yeah, I feel like this. You remember how we talked about in the first and second quatrains, how there's this balancing of the fear of the speaker and their concern for the future and their desire to take pleasure and renew themselves in the now. I feel like that reaches this kind of crisis almost in this last stanza that borders on ungrammatical. I have a hard time understanding the which it is reserved for God above to sanctify to what far ends he will, but which it only needs that we... It's hard to kind of literally parse as a sentence. And I think that's by design to challenge us and confuse us and make us think with this, as we're standing, looking over this spring pastoral event, we're dumbfounded and we're unable to kind of put words together completely and kind of completely parse what's going on. Oh, it's kind of a cheap escape. Maybe there's some brilliant person who's going to comment on this poem in the comment section and break it down for us, how exactly this grammatically works. But I totally agree with you. I think it's a little bit elusive as to what exactly he's suggesting. He separates out, okay, God has these responsibilities and we have these responsibilities and he sanctifies this and all this other stuff. But what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is he needs us to fulfill these things, I think. I think that's what this poem is about. He needs us to take pleasure in these things. It's not enough for God to just set the stage and let it go. He needs us to take pleasure in this stuff as well. And that's the real reason for the speaker of why to delay the uncertainty and fear. Is because it's our responsibility on earth to make the best of what we're given. Well, thank you for sharing this poem with us and with all the people out there. This was super, super fun, Celia, and we'll have to do it again with your next selection.
At some point.
Awesome. All right.